Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We are your hosts, Adriana May and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. So on today's episode, we're excited to do a little reflection time. I feel like towards the end of the year, this is very common. Looking forward to the new year and new goals, but as great as goal setting can be for the new year, we always make sure that we want to reflect back first, celebrate the wins that we've had this year. And so that's what we're going to be doing today.
I know, you just reminded me of a saying that basically said those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it themselves. It's something like that. I know that one sounds like doom, and gloom, but as it relates to us in our art business, especially as I was like listening to our episode 35, guys, that feels so far away, which is when we did the looking back to 2021 and forward into 2022. It just reminded me of this whole notion that if you don't look into your past, especially in your business, it's hard to formulate what kind of plans to make for the future. And there's this concept I'm sure you've all heard of at some point or another of drift, of like, oh, I'll just adapt as things happen, which makes you more reactive as opposed to proactive. And you've heard us talk about planning and things like that. We try to be more on the proactive side of things while allowing other things to happen for us to react to. Of course, it's not, it doesn't all go according to plan, but I don't know. It's just that idea of like, okay, we have to look back, evaluate, and then kind of go from there.
Absolutely. And there are so many things with any business, but especially your creative business, that you can look back on. There may be one or two wins that really stand out in your mind, but today we're really going to take a deep and invite you to do it as well. If you're an artist with an art business listening to this episode, go ahead and make a list of these categories for your own reflection, and then you can kind of look back on your year. So we're going to be covering wins and growth with our marketing, exposure, art making, income stream shifts, personal goals, any other wins that have happened throughout the year, as well as overall themes for the year. Typically, we pick a word or a phrase that we have going into the year. So, how did that go or change for 2022? And also acknowledging what we're most proud of ourselves for this year, really taking that time to celebrate the year as a whole. So, starting at the beginning though with marketing, Adriana, was your marketing this year? What were your wins? Where was the growth, or how did it go different than planned?
So marketing wise, I definitely put less weight on social media. I'm not going to be one of those naysayers of Instagram no longer works or things like that. No, it just shifted. So for what I decided to do was deprioritize online and reprioritize in person, especially with way more things coming back since things opened back up. And as it relates to the output that I was putting out there when I did or when I do share things out there, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or newsletter, wherever it goes, anything that I put online, I did put more of a focus on improving my video editing skills so that the
Mm.
content that was going out there, since video is not going anywhere at all, then have a better production value, if you will. And then the other thing, marketing wise, that I was like, it wasn't a big push goal, but definitely something that I kept in mind throughout the year and I got a little bit better about asking for was newsletter signups. And towards the end of the year, something that I started, which was sparked by an idea of an exhibition we went to, and then you implemented the idea as well, which was with tokens, and you get a token for newsletter signups. I finally bit the bullet, so to speak, and decided to make ceramic ones and started trying that as a way to reward people signing on to my newsletter. And then I started seeing some of the results from that. And I'm like, okay, fine. They're
It
onto
helps.
something with this. So the newsletter itself more than doubled. So I'm extremely grateful. It's still very small, but the growth was, yeah, it's a welcome. It's a welcome addition.
Yeah, and that is so exciting. I know especially both of us have always put a huge emphasis on growing our newsletter. Our relationship with social media ebbs and flows as it does with everyone, especially as in-person relationships are becoming more and more valued with having open studio events and more community events that we're both involved with. But newsletter is kind of one of those tried and true things, as we talk about on the podcast a lot. It's one of the few algorithms that hasn't changed in going on 20, 25 years now. So um, that it was a huge goal for me in 2022 as well. Was the biggest goal was hitting 1,000 subscribers, and I did hit that this month, so a few weeks early, which is very, very exciting. Technically, I'm like 50 short of 1,000 because I think people, when they wrote their email, their handwriting was off, and I put what I thought it could be, but still, I'm counting it. My contacts are over 1,000, so I call that a win. So it's definitely very exciting. It definitely is a lot more fulfilling when making newsletter content, sharing my upcoming exhibitions or shop releases or just behind the scenes the studio with my newsletter, knowing that 1,000 people are going to see it, which is pretty crazy seeing as it's only been 2 years and I started with literally 5 people on my email. It was like you, my mom, my boyfriend at the time, and then 2 email addresses that were me. Like that was the point where like, no, like I hit 5 people. And it was like that for probably 4 months. And I'm like, I am sending a monthly newsletter. I'm doing it. So it really is crazy looking back on that. But with that, with the marketing standpoint, kind of similar to you of fine tuning your editing skills, I've been really focusing on investments for the quality of the content that I'm making. So a new tripod I invested in this year, which I love. You can get like really high height on it. I invested in a GoPro. So I'm still experimenting with that and I'm excited to learn and to keep playing more with how I can utilize a GoPro. Um, but one of the biggest things that has helped with consistent marketing content has been consistently planning those static social media content each month. And it's one of those things that I feel like in a business, especially working with a lot of small businesses, I knew it's one of those best practices, but that is a very common trend with I feel like humans in general. Like we all know what we should be doing. Like, okay, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. But we always make sacrifices or prioritize various things. So prioritizing planning monthly content for my social media platforms has been super helpful with my marketing because it hasn't felt like a huge stressor. But it's also been helpful with converting people to my newsletter and just engaging with the community, even though I don't have to be on social media every single day. But from a follower standpoint, it kind of feels like I am, which also goes towards the exposure goal as well. That's one thing that I want to keep focusing on in the new year, but really looking backwards of growing online digital relationships. So whether it's reaching out to other podcasts, and I was featured on a handful of them, which was a huge goal of mine this year. Getting connected with the North Carolina Museum of Art shop and their 2 locations, which is now my 3rd location outside of our studio. But a lot of that was from them seeing my work online on social media after meeting in person. So they kind of go hand in hand. And from an exposure standpoint, looking back, exposure meaning like people's general awareness of me, my work, my business. I did focus less on exhibitions this year in 2022, which was kind of intentional. I really wanted to be more present with my art making practice, which we'll dive into. So exhibitions kind of took the back burner, but I am super excited to have multiple lined up for 2023. So it was a needed season, which I call a win of relieving myself of that pressure to I have to exhibit here and there, I have to do this, and just leaning into the practice. So intentionally doing my exposure online was a huge win for me this year. How about
Yeah.
you from exposure standpoint?
Well, I definitely did put more focus on the in-person ones and going to different events and networking with other artists and collectors and, folks at different art institutions. So normally I would say out of the two of us, I'm definitely the more introverted one. You're definitely
Yeah.
more extroverted. When it comes to art stuff, I can do it for a little bit more, like interacting with other
Mhm.
folks, and then I'm just like, oh, I'm tired. Like my social battery's drained. But I did put more effort into it this year, and I'm glad I
Yeah.
did. It was a lot of fun. I met so many people. Um, and some of those artists and new connections actually ended up buying some of my work. So I'm like, I mean, it was great. But I'll
Yeah.
say what I
Or
did
being guest on
find.
the podcast as well.
Yes, absolutely. What I'll say as well is like the other thing I did do was change the type of interaction in person. So as
Mm,
opposed to before, I may have said this kind of exposure would be doing a lot of markets. I actually almost eliminated them this year. Like I wanted to see as I was expanding what my art practice looked like, which we'll talk about that next. It was more of a I'm exploring these other things and the amount of time that it would take me, or time investment, I should say, that it would take me to, haul my stuff to a market and then sit there all day and then hope for, our sales going to be worth the day or not. I was like, no, I don't want that this year. Same with some of the exhibitions. I was a little more low key with exhibitions this year. I still have them and I still have things that are up. I still have artwork at
Yeah.
various locations. Some of them are retail, some of them are exhibition spaces, office spaces, etc. But
Hmm.
it was less of a focus on I have to have this big event with, wine and cheese cubes situation. And instead I was like, okay,
Right.
the events we have built in, so to speak, because we are at Art Space. I want to be a little bit better about how I'm presenting myself in those. And then a goal that I had last year that I kind of maintained through this year was the idea of being better about telling my story, or story-based selling, or story-based marketing, I should say. So that was one of the things that was in my mind a lot, is like whenever I'm talking to somebody else, whether they seem immediately interested in my art or not, I still want to be better about connecting with them through the story of the piece itself, if possible, or the series or
Yeah.
whatever it is
I
I'm
love that.
making. So that was definitely very intentional. It's pretty hard at first. I mean, again, I can talk about my art all day, but it's hard not to talk about like the technical stuff, for example. I love talking about like, oh yeah, and then I used this medium and then I scraped this and I did that. And I was like, no, that's not, that's more of teacher talk in a way, like as
Mm.
opposed to someone that's a potential collector and I'm trying to intentionally, craft my story for that. I don't know. Sounds weird when I say
Yeah,
it
and
like
I think
that,
that's very powerful.
but
No, I think that makes total sense. I think it's
yeah.
especially from a m technically it's marketing, but it's also just, like, wanting to connect with whoever's on the other side of the digital content or video or in-person interaction of what
Yeah.
are they truly interested in? And, like, some artists, if they come in, they wanna know, like, what medium did you use, what I don't know, like, scraper did you use to get this texture? There's always a time and place for that. But I love that intentional, and I think that'd be a great thing for our listeners to consider as a goal too of just consciousness of how you present your work, how
Hmm.
you explain your work, really solidifying what a lot of people call like those brand stories of like what are
Yeah.
those stories that are at the core of who you are at the work that you make. It's kind of in line with artist statement, but what are the like 3 to 5 things that are like universal and that connect with people who may want to purchase your work or who want to feature your work in an exhibition and really solidifying what those stories can be because as you said we could sit and talk and rant about our work
Oh,
for hours now on anything but it's almost the clarity of if you could say it in one paragraph versus a full page you want to put it in one and so what are like solidifying your thoughts solidifying those ideas is super super powerful.
yeah. The other part with that is that I didn't necessarily do on purpose at first was almost like pulling back a little bit. I know this is something that if we haven't talked about on the podcast, I'm sure we will at some point. And it's this whole idea of what is my online and in person, in this case, presence like, and what is my, I don't want to make it sound bad, but my curated story, if you will. So this leads into both the
Mm,
exposure and the marketing side. So as opposed to saying, I'm going to do X post, right? And just put it out there for the algorithm's sake, or I'm just going to do this quick video and post it so that I'm showing up consistently, which is still important. And I need to get back to that story for another day. Um, it's more of a, I want whatever it is to be for sure in line with the way I want to present myself and the story behind the art and why I make it and how I make it and all those things. So it's almost like trying to figure out what what are my parameters? Kind of like I know we've talked about before about what like whatever you show online and in person about your art is almost like what do you put inside that box, and
mhm.
then certain things, for example, you choose not to talk about. It's not, and we're not talking about curating in terms of fake Instagram, this is how I look and everything's hunky dory. More like being intentional about what we show and what we don't show. Like for example,
Yeah.
you're not going to see, and I give you an example because that sounds kind of, I don't know, heavy or abstract, but like I don't show my pet pictures on my Instagram grid, and I'm not going to. I mean, they're
Mhm.
awesome. Could I maybe put them in stories every once in a blue moon? I have, and I probably will. I mean, they're adorable, so there's that. But I choose not to show them as part of, oh, I brought the dog to my studio, for example, which I don't know,
Right.
maybe someday. Does that make
Yeah, but I
sense? It's
think
almost like
no, it definitely does. And that's
editing.
definitely
Let's
something we
call it
talk.
editing, not curating. Let's change the word. It's editing in a way, what you show and what you don't, as it relates to your larger story of your work and the way you present yourself as an artist. So
Yeah, it's
that's,
just being intentional.
yeah,
And I think that's it's like having a strategy, being intentional, whatever word you want to use, but I think it's is smart in terms of both from a storytelling standpoint, it clarifies what message is being received, but also from a I mean, of course, thinking with social media and content creation, it really gives you kind of a blueprint of what to share. And we dive deeper into this on our online community of like what roadmap do you want your follower, future collector to follow? And you almost like want to take out all the noise of us as people, so to speak, and just like we almost exist in this silo, which is kind of a rabbit hole of a whole other social media conversation
strategy
of like,
situation.
yeah,
Yeah.
like there, I mean, we all have those accounts that we follow on Instagram or on TikTok where you're like, in my mind, this person only exists like in this bubble. You only know what you like, what they choose to show you. There's this person that sits in this room and talks about these kind of stories on TikTok. Like, but they are a full-fledged person. Like they
Hmm.
have relationships and friendships and go on trips, but like they only show this thing.
Well, it's almost like
Which
that idea of like meeting your math teacher at the grocery store and you go like, wait, you want
yeah,
food?
yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? Like you only know them within the context of the classroom. And the moment you take them outside
yes.
of it, they may even come up right up to you and you're like, I'm sorry, who are you? And then it just clicks like, oh, because you've never seen them outside of that environment. I feel it's
That's a
very
great
similar
way
in
of
that
putting
way.
it. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I think especially with community facing studios, I mean, I found that a lot like right as we were opening up from COVID again, like having shared on my Instagram stories and sharing content that people would then come into the space, which I intentionally wanted them to like feel comfortable in the space, feel as if they had been there before, but they hadn't. And so they would come and I love when people come and say, like, I follow you on Instagram or I love seeing like your growth or this or that. And it's like when I start talking to them, it's like feels like they already know me in a way,
Mhm.
which can be good or bad, but it's also it's fun being able to like because you're interacting with them as you said in that space because they're
Mhm.
coming to your studio and interacting with your artwork at a market or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it's I find it's more helpful than harmful from like an editing standpoint. It's
Yeah.
not editing because like you're being secretive, but you're just being private about certain things and
Yes.
highlighting your brand stories, your artwork, what makes this work complicated and unique and beautiful in its own way.
Well, that brings me to a perfect segue with art making because that's what happened to me with ceramics. So for the longest time, I was like, I can't.
Mm,
It's not that I can't. I intentionally chose not to share a lot of the ceramic journey at the very beginning. Now I did document it, so I could go back and like still share it. Um, so I have videos and things about that have, content that I have around that. Not as fresh because it's from a few months ago, but who cares? But it was because at the beginning I didn't want that unsolicited feedback of and I still got it of like, again, being public facing, of like, are you going to quit painting and just do ceramics instead? Are you going to do pottery now and just sell mugs and cups and bowls? And I was like, no. So like for me, that fell right into that whole editing thing of I choose not to share too much about this yet until I feel ready to. And until I
mm.
am 100% clear on my end, which we do have an episode about that, distraction or expansion, if memory serves, is the title of that one. Um, but I wanted to make sure that before I started sharing that part of it, that I had already made a solid or solid as I could get of a decision to expand into ceramics, which came with a giant time commitment. I had already experimented with them in the past, but to actually make them part of my body of work and make it so that there's a conversation between the paintings and the ceramics, and you can tell they're made by me and they can go next to each other when it's a whole nother set of parameters and challenges. That was tough, but it was part of that story of like, okay, I need to choose what, from an art making perspective, not just from exposure online, what do I share and what do I not, or and when, right? So it's not hush hush secret secret. It's more of a, I want to wait and see first and see where it goes. But that being said, some of the other art making highlights of the year, um, one of which we've talked about, of course, is and actually listening back to our old episode on our goals for 2022. This was one of them, and it
Uh,
was the idea of making larger paintings. So definitely something that I've kept up. I recently finished the 6 footer, like 6 feet tall painting, so that was incredible. And I have some other big pieces that I finished, some of which have found homes throughout the year. I have a few more on the pipeline that are either started or at least I have my sketch ready to go. So that's been really cool. And then another thing that I opened myself up to this year, and I've done it before. Like last year, I had a lot of that community canvas project was like one of my big collab, working with other artists and folks that don't consider themselves artists but still are creative, like collaborating in it. And this year, I feel like the way that manifested itself was in doing collaborations. Actually, you know what? And last year, we also had the Fresh exhibition, also another collaboration. So there's that. This year, it manifested itself a little bit differently. I worked with a jeweler and a leather worker, and we created a series of work we called the Three Muses Collection. And it just expanded for me. I think that was definitely my word, but it expanded for me kind of like, what can I do with this? And how do I combine it with these other materials? But they're the ones doing those materials. So how do we put all this together? I mean, it was a completely different way of working than saying, Jackie, you and I are doing a painting together, but we both paint. You know what I mean? And we're both familiar
right.
with the medium, we're both familiar with the substrate, as opposed to with this is Jackie, give me something you made, and I'm gonna make something, and they're somehow gonna go together. But we made them
Right.
independently, intentionally to go together, but they're different mediums, they're different styles, they're different everything,
Yeah.
but they're supposed to come together. Like, I don't know, that was a new experience. I'm looking forward to doing more of that. So we'll see. But yeah, that was part of my art making update for this past year for sure.
Yeah, I know working large is definitely something that I'm sure listening back to that episode, I do wanna go back and listen to it. It's probably interesting going back from episode, what, was it 35 to now,
Yeah.
in the 90s, of I know getting bigger was very intentional for both of us this year. And so that is something I really love doing. I found it super challenging, and I found it very rewarding in that I don't know if I'm necessarily gonna continue to work at that scale. I kind of have now wrapping up a series of 12 large paintings, find myself wanting to retreat back to a little smaller. Um, Not any negative to the scale, but there are certain styles or sketches that I've done that I just feel like will work better and be more powerful at a smaller scale, which I think was probably the biggest win for me of scaling up because in creating, for me, large scale felt like 3 foot panels. Because I work on panel, not canvas, so size limitations are different. But I also did a series of 4-inch paintings and really realizing, okay, I'm applying the same concepts, the same marks, the similar, like just scaled down version of what this painting is. And it doesn't translate the same way, which consciously I knew, like from studies, and you know that as an artist, like scale is a huge factor. But it was really powerful and I feel like helpful to see that and learn that firsthand of with my style specifically, because we're all kind of in control of our style, some more conscious, some more subconsciously. Of okay, what aspects of my style are consistent and effective large scale, and then which ones are consistent and effective in a smaller scale, whether it be 4-inch or 18-inch. So that was, I think, a huge win for me, creating one cohesive large body that will be in 3 different exhibitions next year, which I'm very excited for. But I kind of find myself wanting to retreat back a little bit smaller, which I also find as a win, being so within my art making practice that I feel drawn in a specific direction very powerfully. That was ultimately one of the big goals for me this year. And so I think by scaling up and then now having a driving force going into 2023 is ultimately the goal that I had in the beginning. So it kind of comes full circle. Which also kind of ties in from an income standpoint. Um, Creating a large scale series, I knew that that would shift the intention with what my art business as a whole had to offer because of course if your as your paintings get larger, just based on square footage alone, the paintings are going to be more expensive. So that's going to be a different audience, a different space that's needed for a future collector. And so I knew that would shift my income streams for this year. And so my goal going into 2022 was to double my income from 2021. And I did fall a little bit short of that, but I did still see it as a win because I was never I was never stressed falling short of that goal. And I was a lot more intentional, which I feel like is a word that keeps coming up in this conversation. I was very intentional and critical from an income stream standpoint in choosing which opportunities I wanted to pursue, or let me reevaluate this. So, like a product line, for example, I have a series of art products that I offer from window hangings to stickers to cards. And so I did expand that this year, and that was a very intentional decision that has been very beneficial. And it's definitely something that I'm thinking a lot more going into next year of not just being thinking about, okay, do I want to do more in-person workshops? Because we've kind of dabbled this year with, I'm trying to think of how to talk about this, of like, I've experimented with a lot of different income stream possibilities this year. In terms of, I almost opposite of you, I had never done a market before this year. And so I did 3 in-person markets this year. I'm like, what is that experience even like? Do I like that? Do I want to do that? Teaching online classes and online workshops, teaching in-person workshops from a business art standpoint, expanding product lines, working with different types of materials. So I really just kind of experimented and got a taste for how my art business could expand outside of original artwork. And now I feel like I have a lot more of an educated experience to move forward with that information, which was really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I went the opposite direction than you in the products. I actually almost eliminated them, um,
Mhm.
which was intentional. And it was same like you were saying, that whole idea of like, how do you want to, like, what do you want your income streams to look like? And what I did is I had evaluated how they performed in previous years, like the different ones. And
Right.
I was like, is the amount of effort, now that being said, I do have to make a disclaimer. A lot of these were original art products, not just straight up reproductions. There's a difference.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I feel like the original art products, for the most part, the amount of time spent making them was not, I couldn't justify the amount of time I was spending versus how much I was earning, like barely minimum wage on them. So I was like, they're out for the most part. That being said, in a way, ceramics are, original.
Right.
Well, they're not products either. I am making originals, but
Right,
um,
which I think you are very intentional with, which we've had so many conversations about that, of the difference between, ceramics and, like, day-to-day pottery, is
mm,
that you've also chosen intentionally, you're not, at this time, currently doing, like, bulk productions of, like,
no,
coffee mugs. I would
no,
categorize that more so as, like, an original art product object. It
yeah,
is a piece of art, but it's also, like, a functional piece of art. So
yeah,
that's,
it's
you
functional.
intentionally went away from that
Yeah,
ceramic route.
yeah. So it's like things like stickers. I don't do stickers right now. I have
Right.
stickers. I have some leftovers, but like I intentionally did not get more stickers. I will next year probably, but things like mini painting reproductions, mini just all kinds of stuff, even prints. I was like, nope. I'm cutting back from that, in part because the time that I would need to invest in order to get those income streams back up and updated, so to speak, I would rather spend that time to continue to further my education with ceramics and get
Mm.
better with ceramics. So that's kind of how I shifted that.
Yeah.
Same with social media, was like the amount of time I could be doing social media posts, I would rather be at Pullen Art Center, close to here, taking pottery wheel classes. Like
Yeah,
that,
and I
that's
think
kind of, it was like a
I
shift of time blocks in a way,
yeah,
like
and I think that's a
equivalency.
good conversation to bring up before you continue with the income streams of, it's with any new process, whether it's a new art making form, whether it's a new product line, whether it's new whatever, you do have to kind of block off and accept, okay, this isn't gonna overnight just start making me
No.
hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So like accept, okay, is this 6 months or 4 months or however much time it's gonna take to put the systems and the education in place, is that time gonna be beneficial in the end? Or how long will it be before I reevaluate if
Mm,
this is still worth it? And I think that's one thing of when our relationship with products has become very different this year,
mhm.
with you kind of shying away from them. And I've kind of leaned into them because they are not original art products. They're original art designs, but I am removed from the art making or the physical making process of them, which was an intentional choice. And so it's not now that the systems are in place, it kind of feels like you might as well keep going with them because it's all the work has been done and it's just basically like profit margin at that point, and it has led to larger sales of original artwork. They've proven lead magnets. And so I think that's one thing that's for our listeners, if you're thinking about original art products or reproducible art products, it's how much time are you willing and able to invest? And at what point are you going to reevaluate that process? And kind of having those markers in mind. Not saying you have to give it up forever, not saying that you can't change that date when it comes, but acknowledging it's not going to make money overnight. It is kind of that long game. Um, and figuring out, is that something that you value? Is it something you wanna be known for as well?
Exactly. Well, no, that's a good point because it's like I started with them in 2020 and they had
Yeah.
2020, not that it counts in many ways, but they had 2021, for me to evaluate performance and time commitments and things like that. So 2022, I was like, this is not a
Yeah.
focus. This is not a
Yeah.
focus. But um, that's a good point. Also, what you just mentioned about the what do you want to be known for? For me, it was a much bigger goal to sell bigger paintings this year. And that was very intentional because I was like, if I do the smaller things, whether they're products or originals, I need volume. And it's not that I can't create volume. We've established this before. I can make a lot of paintings in a short amount of time.
Yes.
Um, or even ceramics have gotten much faster now.
If that's not
But
something that fulfills you, then
well, it's not a fulfillment thing. It's actually a black and white, what does it look like on my income? So it turned into if I
mm,
am selling stickers and I make $1 sticker, for example, how many stickers do I have to sell to make it worth the time I spent into making them? Which, by the way, I will bring stickers back. Don't get me wrong. They did work.
I love
So, I
stickers.
know, me too. Me too. Don't worry. They are coming back. If anybody's been hunkering for them, they're coming back. But like, for example, stickers was one I evaluated and I decided not a priority right now. I'll bring them back later.
And that's with,
But
like, making stickers to reflect your new body of work. It's
correct,
not
correct.
keeping old stickers.
No, 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 no.
It's yeah, it's updating the system, so to speak.
Yes, it's updating the system, but also updating the third party relationships that I have so that on my website, if somebody asks for a sticker, it also goes out automatically. I don't have to ship it. The fulfillment
Right.
partner will ship it. Anyway, so it's not just, oh, I printed it and I have them in my studio. No, there's other systems that go behind it. So that's where I would say I had to pull back a little bit in favor of expanding the ceramic side. But it's been really good. Sold some of the biggest works I've ever sold in my life. Some of them I was like, is this even going to happen? And again, it falls back into that conversation. How many stickers would I have to sell as opposed to the equivalent of that one painting? And for me, it became this more conscious shift of, okay, I'll always have affordable stuff. Don't get me wrong. That's always something I'm conscious of, because I was there and that helped me. And some of my first pieces ever that I collected were very small and very economical. So I'll always have that. But more of a shift of like when it comes to paintings, I still want to go big. I mean, really big. And then when it comes to ceramics, I don't want to focus on production because again, that's almost like the sticker equivalent to me, right? How many mugs do you have to make it worth your while? And how much time would I have to invest to get good enough to produce, say, 20, 30 an hour? I'm nowhere near that to make it worth my while. So it
Oh, you
turned
mean, like,
into I'm gonna focus.
original stickers?
What was that?
Original painting stickers?
No, 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 just regular stickers. I just
Oh,
mean the equivalent of that would be like making mugs. They're still a product and you make them in volume in order to make it worth your while. So for me,
right.
it became a question of like, no, I'd rather focus on the sculptural, more fine art side of things with that too, as opposed to the more product or functional or bulk volume based side of the business. So it's an intentional shift. So that's
Mm,
having taken a break from some of the products now I can go back and look and be like, okay, which ones did I actually miss and what am I
mhm.
willing to bring back? So, for
Yeah.
example, stickers is one of them, prints, maybe. Like there are other things that I'm just looking at. And I'm like, okay, what am I willing to bring back or
Right.
not? But
And
yeah,
I think that's
there's
one of
been a
the
lot of that.
I think that's one of the clarification points too, is because you were printing your prints on your own printer, right? And your
No,
own stickers.
no, no,
No?
neither one. That was in 2020 that I was doing that in early 2021. And then I shifted to have another company do my stickers,
Right.
another company do my prints.
Makes sense, makes sense.
No, I
I was gonna say,
shifted
because if
both.
you're doing them all by hand,
Oh, no, no,
it's
no, no.
it's great from like a again, understanding what pieces translate with scale and if you're experimenting, but from a scalability standpoint, that can be difficult. And there's
Yeah.
that conscious time like in your business where hopefully you gain traction enough on it to make it sure it's worthwhile, but then investing in so you're not as hands-on in the
Yeah.
process.
Plus, it's again that conversation of that collector conversation. It's a different collector base that will
Yeah,
buy a print versus the one that will buy a large painting that goes at the end of the hallway because it fits nowhere else. You know what I mean? Like those are very different
very different.
groups. So for me, it was more of a conscious shift of I want to move. I don't like this expression, but I'm going to use it anyways. I want to move up market
Mm,
with some more expensive items to actually, instead of trying to hustle volume wise. I don't know. Again,
yeah,
neither way is wrong because I also know painters that will crank out a lot of paintings in a short amount of time and sell them like hotcakes. So I'm
yeah,
like, it's completely up to you. But for me, it just became that shift of I'm okay with doing less pieces overall, but larger and or more of investment pieces with the caveat knowing that if I'm going to do that move, it also comes with less frequent sales, which can be really, really scary
right.
because the higher you go up, then the smaller that collector base can get. So yeah, so it's been a balancing act.
Yeah.
But what I've decided to do that I did a couple times this year, and I'm definitely going to be doing more of last next year, is to help balance out those income streams. Is I'm bringing teaching back. So
Mm,
I've done teaching before. I did a few courses here and there throughout 2022, but I'm actually going to bring it back in 2023 as a way to have an income stream that's a little bit more stable that I can schedule to help me for those times when paintings, for whatever reason, a collector's still trying to decide, do I want that one or this one? Can I fit it? Do we need to do a payment plan? Whatever the case may be, then I can have something a little more steady to carry me through. Plus, I
mhm.
enjoy teaching and it's always fun. And it's always great to see people's eyes light up and get the aha moment. So it's turned into like, okay, what if I'm going to remove, which again, this is like a conversation I love that we have. It's like if you're going to remove a income stream that you have and you're going to add a new one, that's going to change things around and it's going to take time also for your audience to know the shift and or for you to add more folks to your followers, audience members, collector base, whatever you want to call it, that belong to that new group that perhaps you're adding in. And
Mhm.
you're knowing some of the ones that if you're removing a product line, they may no longer follow you or they may unsubscribe because suddenly what they like that you did, it's not available anymore. I mean, this happens if you change your art style too, or if you change mediums completely, it can happen too. So it turns more into like, okay, what do I want to keep and what am I okay with editing? But I also know that could actually have an impact on sales and also on followers. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but I work for myself. I'm like, I'm not working for somebody else. So I'm like, I know. It's a shift. It's like a
And I
bake.
think that
It's removing the cupcakes in favor of
mhm.
scones. I don't
I
know.
think that's one of the empowering but scary things with having your own business is
Mhm.
it's always just this ever evolving process of learning about our business, learning about our audience, learning about ourselves, and then also learning about the artwork that we make. It's just like constant discovery. But one thing that I think has been conscious, and we've talked about on this a lot, is just like intentionally choosing things in your business to try to experiment to move in that direction. And if it is the right direction, great. If you feel like, well, maybe I should try and go back in this way, you can. But like, it's better to do that than to not make a decision or to just passively let your audience control 100% of your business and what they want. And you just are like kind of then a worker for your audience. And we talk about that a lot of consciously choosing how you structure your business, how you make artwork, so that the whole reason we all become or are artists and start art businesses is because we can't help but do that. You want to have a job that is fulfilling and powerful and giving to people in the community that respond to it. but you don't want to make a creative business that you then are like dreading and don't want to show up to on a daily basis, and being a bad boss to yourself where you're then plagued with all these tasks that don't fill you up. So it's always a balance, but I think ultimately discovery and intention is the overarching theme with it, which also ties into personal goals, which I know we've both had personal goals that may not have to do with our art practice or art business, but inevitably being entrepreneurs, it will affect it. So going into this year, one of the biggest things that, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, one of the biggest goals for me was to have less expectations of myself. And I'm going to put a caveat onto that, like asterisk, 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 of knowing myself. I have very much like workaholic tendencies. And that comes from a long line of like childhood work ethic, being rewarded for being the hard worker, for being consistent, being
Your
an athlete,
personality.
being an athlete growing up. Like it was always like, if you're 5 minutes, what was it? Like, if you're 5 minutes early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. Like, if you miss practice, you have to run like suicide sprints because your competitor was at practice and they were getting better, even though you had like strep throat and were like throwing up. Like, we don't care. Like, someone else is always getting ahead of you. So that was definitely that, like, okay, I always need to be working towards something mindset that is very helpful and is very like was it embraced and celebrated by society. So this year my goal was to weirdly like do less, or like have less expectations of myself, which knowing that and doing that, because I know my default is to be very consistent and to work very hard. And so it's not really a escape from not hitting my goals, but not having toxic expectations of myself, which hopefully some listeners can relate to that. But one thing with that was being very more intentional with my rest this year. It was definitely a year of highs and lows in my personal life. And I realized that rest is needed during both of those times. When things are very, very good, you need to rest. When things are maybe not so great, you need to rest. And finding that balance along the way. And rest being not just time outside of the studio, outside of creating, but also just not actively having to work towards these larger, crazy goals. So I found that was one of my biggest wins. And that also is doubled with time tracking this year. That's something that I've been very intentional with doing. And it kind of like puts into plain black and white numbers these things that we know about ourselves. Like, how do you spend your time on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis? How many hours a week are you working on your art business? How many hours a week am I in the studio? How many times am I working with clients doing digital marketing? And not necessarily doing that as a way of finding guilt or shame or, oh, I should be doing more of this. But again, just having informed data to make conscious decisions moving forward. And I know we talked about this on the last episode about burnout of, okay, well, if you're feeling super burned out, let's look at our time tracker for the past month. Okay, totally just throwing numbers out. Overall, I worked, let's say, 30 hours this week, 30 hours this week. And then I did 2 weeks where I worked 65 hours. No wonder I'm burnt out. Like, and that gauge is different for everyone. Again, it's super general numbers. We talked last episode about tasks that fill you up versus deplete you. But again, just being intentional with time. And that includes rest, because that is very much needed.
So now that you mentioned that, I don't know. I like that in many ways, and perhaps it's because we work together on so many projects and we probably like feed off of each other's energies on that. Time tracking was definitely important for me. And one of my goals, like listening back to that old episode we mentioned, episode 35, that was one thing that I brought up of like, I need to be more conscious about how much time I spend. Long story short, I also have some workaholic tendencies, and to me, art does not feel like work. Now, I'm not talking admin time. That's definitely work. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But like the actual art making process itself, it's very easy for me to get hyper focused and like just, oh, look, it's been 7 hours and I haven't had food and my head hurts and my feet hurt and my hand hurts. Wait, oh crap, like I haven't stopped for a while. So I can be bad about that. So what one of the things that I had decided to implement for this year, well, there were two things. The one that I did for most of the year, which I'm very proud of myself, thank you very much, is I implemented Sacred Creativity Wednesdays, is kind of what I call them. So outside of maybe having a class during that day, I rarely have anything else scheduled on that day. Anything solid, definitely nothing admin. My scheduling might be like a class, reading, going out, to a park or nature preserve, sketching outside. Like it's more things to refill my creativity and or spark ideas for new things, as opposed to being an admin day that I also have to do this thing and I got to put wires on the back of paintings and also need to frame and I need to update my website and I need to send a newsletter. So basically, it was a way of saying, unless I absolutely have to, I'm going to try very, very intentionally not to do that on Wednesdays, middle of the week, whatever. That, and then with that came not just on Wednesdays, but also to reduce the chances of me overworking, which again can be very easy for me to do with art. This was a few months back, so I haven't had it as long, but I'm already enjoying the results. I started using Clockify, which I think we've talked about in the past. Clockify as well as a visual timer. You guys will have to like look it up. A time timer is what the one I use is called. But basically to say I'm intentionally going to set in my art practice for the next 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, 20 minutes, I'm going to do X task, right? And then using Clockify to actually track how long it took, and then being able to look back at categories and say, this is how I spent my time in the studio this week. And what it's resulted in is I definitely was working at least 60 hours a week. So the goal that I implemented was, and as a small business owner, this is going to happen. You are going to work more than a regular 40-hour week. But the change that I implemented, besides having the Wednesday, which does count towards that thing because it is art related, was to basically say if Saturday evening rolls around and I'm at 49 hours, 50 hours for the week, I'm not going in on Sunday. I just need to step back and reduce that. It almost feels like I'm always on a bullet train going fast, 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 fast. But that's how I work anyways. And I need to pause that. I need time to recover, like you said, not just the art making side, but also I need social time. I need Netflix time. I need like
Yeah.
just stand on, sit on the rocking chair on the porch and do nothing for at least 20 minutes. I don't know. It doesn't have to be go exercise. Like it doesn't have to be a lot or this giant project, but it's like for my own mental and physical and let's call it creativity health.
Yeah.
I need to rest. I need to refill. So that's one thing that I'm excited that I put into place during 2022 and will continue forward is that setting some of those parameters and limits and then also tracking the actual time itself. How is it spent? Not as a way of shoulda, coulda, woulda, spent more time in admin or less time in this experiment with clay or whatever it is, but just being conscious of it and then making intentional decisions around it. So that was cool. Um, and then, but wait, there's more. That's more like personal goals. There were a few other things that stood out to me as I was looking back in the year that I'm very excited about. Um, Obviously, one of them is, like I mentioned, the whole painting thing and finding homes for some of the larger work, which is fantastic because, by the way, y'all, like storage is always limited for us, anyways. I don't have like this giant warehouse I can put them in. So making something big comes with a question of where's it going to live until somebody adopts it and takes it home.
Yep.
So that was a good win. The other one is this one wasn't as intentional at the beginning, but it just worked out that way. And actually, I'm not mad about it. Is the way I want to put it. So normally I would have several series, like painting series that I create throughout the year. And this time, the whole year I've basically stayed within the same series, although ceramics technically could count as different. But I've done my very best to bring them together so that they're an extension of the painting series, which is called Visions in Color, as opposed to an actual departure from it. So that's story for another day. And then the other one, which I'm extremely excited about, ties back to the whole online presence type goal of getting better about videography, is that I did finally start my YouTube channel And I don't know, it's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of things I got to learn about it. It's also going to be helpful in terms of like sometimes a newsletter, I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. And I don't always want to try to be selling stuff to people, which is not true. That's not what newsletters are about. I mean, that's one of the purposes for them, but not the only one. So having something else to share where I can be like, hey, not in 10-15 second clips, but actually in this 15-minute video at a pace that feels good to me, I'm going to walk you around the studio and show you things and get up close. And it's not little tiny clips with music going really fast that maybe or maybe you didn't see on your explore feed, when you were on Instagram or TikTok or wherever. It's more like, no, it's a little more intentional. It's a little more step into the studio with me kind of feeling. I don't know. I feel like that'll be the closest thing that feels comfortable to me and feels natural to me of kind of the way you bring people into your practice. You know how you share stories and things and people are like, I feel like I've been there before in a way, or
Yeah.
like I know you. To me, it feels a little bit more natural to do so within a longer video format than in short spurts. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think I said this a few episodes back, if not the last one, that I'm going to attempt to do this weekly, which means newsletters instead of 2 a month, and then you don't hear from me for 3 months, and then I get back to it, which I'm not going to guilt myself over it. Priorities, people, we got to balance it all. But I think it'll be a little bit more conducive to me sharing more often, at least through my newsletter. Like, hey, I created this video production, so to speak.
Yeah.
And here's what I got to share and the story behind it and background. I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but I want to at least do, which we'll talk more about when we talk about future goals, but more consistent with it.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that
for
big
sure.
win being of starting the system and intentionally starting it. You kind of have that foundation laid, and now it's executing it and seeing what happens in the new year, which is
And
half
not
the
wanting
battle a lot of the
to
time.
share it unless I'm sure, which I think is a recurring theme with me. It's like, nope, I'm gonna wait until I feel like I'm good and ready.
Yeah.
But also do start. Like it's not just it
Let's
has to
do
be
it.
perfect, because that's never gonna happen and then you're never gonna do it. So it's more of a middle ground. How close can I get to good enough to start and then do it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of similar to some overall wins that I felt like from this year. Newsletter growth was like the biggest intention that I had from an admin standpoint, which is of course is a huge win. And I didn't really think about it until you mentioned that, but I think a lot of that came with going out and being interviewed on other podcasts was very intentional this year. So that also, in addition to sharing behind the scenes of my art practice in my newsletter or upcoming events that we have monthly events at the studio, is also sharing, hey, I was on this podcast. If you want to take a listen, here it is. Or our weekly podcast episodes, but also doing quarterly studio update videos. So those are things that I have on my YouTube page, in addition to some more short form content, because logistically, we won't go into it, but in my new studio that I moved into last year, the sound can be a bit questionable with an HVAC unit in my studio. So I have realized I just consciously don't do as many Instagram stories or even like live talking videos because there's this buzzing in my studio. And we've tried microphones, I'm trying to figure it out. So I have to do more of those voiceover style videos, which I enjoy, it's extra work. But having those quarterly studio updates on my YouTube page, in my newsletter, turn them into blogs has been super, super helpful. And definitely something I didn't do before. And I'm excited to refine it moving forward. And I guess the other one win that sticks out to me was having my first ever studio collector event in my studio. So I did it this holiday season in November. And that had been on my like vision board, so to speak, of my art business. And wow, imagine one day having a whole newsletter that I could just send out. People can come to my public facing studio and look at the new work in my collection. Like thinking of that back in 2018, 2019, when I maybe was making like 2 paintings the entire year, was like, oh yeah, right. That's never going to happen. And so I definitely learned a lot through the event. There's always the logistics of, do you do it during the holiday season? Not during the holiday season, on the weekend, during the week, what time? Like, I'm excited to prioritize that moving forward. But again, just doing the first one can sometimes be the most nerve-wracking, the hardest. It's kind of vulnerable too. Like you're like putting yourself out there. So I was very proud of myself for doing that, because looking at like the overarching theme for 2022, 2020, I feel like was essentially for me, like launching my business. I started making social media posts. I started my website in 2020. I think I launched in February. I started my newsletter in April 2020. And then 2021 was really laying the foundation. So really getting settled into art space, intentionally, let me launch a product line, let me build a collection, had my first solo show. So 2022, my theme was really to build off of that foundation and grow, which I feel like I was pretty successful at. I feel like I still had to build a lot of systems and put them in place. And so build looked a bit different than I thought it was, but I feel a lot more confident in like something, for example, as like inventory for my artwork. Before 2022, I feel like I didn't, which is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I feel like I didn't have enough work to have to create an art inventory system or to have to be disciplined with it, because I wasn't making work as rapidly. But this year I'm like, oh, I need to do that, because I legitimately will like forget where paintings are, which is a great problem to have, or forget which piece is sold. Or a system, like I said earlier, social media content creation. So I fell short with sales this year for my goal, but I feel like the biggest win was being intentional, building systems, and having that intentional growth within my business. So overall for you, Adriana, though, how do you feel like your 2022 goals went with the word?
I thought they went really well. I think my theme was really expansion. Like regardless of what my original word was, it doesn't matter. It definitely was expansion. At least that's what it all definitely evolved into. Um Expanding into larger work, expanding into ceramics, expanding into different concepts, so like and going a little bit deeper on the existing concepts of my work, expanding into more in-depth conversations with studio visitors and collectors, expanding the way I show up in video form, essentially. So there was a lot of that going on for sure. Same as you. I don't think income wise, it was not the same either. But in talking to other art professionals and gallery owners, that's across the board.
Yeah.
Economy can't do much about it. So where the fourth quarter was generally my strongest thus far, the year's not over. Thus far, it hasn't been as good, but but early in next year, I already have like solo shows and other events and classes and things lined up. So it's more of a don't worry about it too much as long as the system's in place. I mean, similar to you, although I started events and things like that in 2019, early 2019, and then moved to doing things in, 2020, 2021, whatever. So similar timeline than yours, but perhaps like 1 year back, give or take. Yeah, I think overall it went well. Like I'm not mad. There were some challenging bits for sure. But for the most part, I think it was positive. A lot of lessons learned, a lot of things, like I said, that I decided to take out, see how I felt about it. Some of them are coming back, some of them are staying out forever. Which more on that on a future episode. So I would have to say, with the ups and downs of the years, the part, and I feel like this is a common theme for both of us, that I feel proud of both of us
Yeah.
for would have to be that instead of going for hustle culture, we've both been a little more conscious about sustainability and checking in with each other and saying, are you feeling crispy? What's happening? Is this like a priority right now? What can move? What can be exchanged? What things are we putting too much pressure on each other for? What can we support each other? So
Yeah.
overall, I think it was good.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you,
being very
2022.
intentional, prioritizing sustainability, which
Yeah.
I think is a very good mindset going into the new year, which we will cover in a future episode of what our New Year's goals will be, which is ever present in conversations these days.
Yeah, absolutely. But more to come on the next episode for that. We are going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes. We can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, you can find me at Amay Art across all platforms.
I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Or if you want to stay connected with the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.